This is a proposal that has come from the two other sending
So
districts.
the idea is, I mean, look, here's the reality. The funding formula we have right now is already fair, but people don't wanna pay for it. And so it's, let's figure out a different formula because, and no one's, there is no formula. You can't wave a magic wand and not owe more money. I mean, the reality is, this is what it costs, and we either need to pay the bill or not. And right now, it's, well, I don't wanna pay for it, so let's see if there's some magical formula out there that will make me not have to pay for it. And all this does is say, you know what, let's change the funding formula so that Penn Ridge will pick up the whole balance so that we don't have to pay for it. And it's the same thing that happened with the capital, you know, with how they fund their capital projects, which is how we're funding the majority of that. I mean, I don't think that it's appropriate for Penn Ridge to continually, this is the fair formula. I think if we wanna look at making things more fair, it's the other formula we should look at, because that's the formula that's not fair. That's based on real estate.
And the difference is, I don't wanna get into the capital budgets for, because that one is not one that is creating a budget problem.
Because it did, but Penn Ridge didn't do anything about it, because really it created a problem for us when we had to borrow the money, the majority of it, when we funded it. But Penn Ridge
We knew what the formula
complained.
was, we could have said no.
Exactly, but that's my point. It's when we're the ones who are getting kind of, you know, when we're the ones who are picking up the cost of it, we suck it up and pay for it. And now that it's a different district that's getting hit with the cost, it's kind of, well, let's reorganize it, because Penn Ridge picked up the cost on the other formula, and they picked it up in the capital project, so let's do it
I
again.
don't think it's that simple, I really don't, and one of the reason I would say that is, first of all, there are schools that do fund their vocational school this way. So this is not an out of the blue kind of new idea, this is something that's taken from other places. The other thing that is factual is that the first time I heard this proposal was in 1998, so it's been around for a long time. That, you know, some people want to do it a different way. It's just, you know, and I don't disagree with you that I think that the current formula is a much fairer, but that's not what everyone's view is. And I'm presenting this because we're trying to negotiate a change, and obviously we have to get buy-in from all three parties. It doesn't matter what it is to change it. The other thing is it'll stay as it is, and sooner or later, what will eventually happen is that the revenue and expenditure numbers will be enough out of sync that 1 year, the vocational school is going to come back and say, we don't have enough money to pay our bills, sending schools, you've got to give us more money.
But the problem isn't with the funding formula, the problem is that people aren't paying it. If you go back to the slide you had before,
Right.
the funding formula means we should have been paying this, and we're actually paying that. And so the problem isn't the funding formula, the problem is it's compounding, because since the gentleman's agreement
Yes,
got put into place,
absolutely. And that was-
people haven't been paying their bills. And so the longer you don't pay your bills, the bigger and
Right,
bigger it gets.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right.
So I don't think the funding formula is the problem, I think it's,
Well,
you
the
gotta pay
eligible
for it.
enrollment, can I just ask, I don't mean to interject, but your eligible enrollment numbers here
Mhm.
for each school. The eligible enrollment for, am I correct, that Quakertown has more eligible enrollment because they add in more grades?
No.
How does that
The
work?
eligible enrollment numbers are actually all students that are enrolled in a given year at a given high school. So in Quakertown, there's 1,665
All of the
students,
students.
9 through 12 at their high school.
So 9 through 12, 1665 is
Right.
their total number, that could go.
Now, of those,
So-
currently, roughly 330 go to the VOTEC, so about 20%. At Penn Ridge, the number of students at this high school is 2,355. Of those, 266, more or less, go to the VOTEC, meaning that it's only like 11%. So there's a big difference in the percentage of students we're sending. Some of that is educational philosophy. It depends on what the school district decides they want to do in terms of who they send to the VOTEC and who chooses to go to the VOTEC. Because obviously it is a choice that students make. Sometimes their parents want them to go there, sometimes they don't, but that enters into it too. It's who chooses to go.
So because we're a larger school district and we have
Right.
more students in our high school, we would pay more of the bill even though we're not sending as many kids to the tech school,
Right.
which doesn't make sense because we're paying to educate those students here, we
Right.
shouldn't also be paying to educate the students who aren't going to our tech school,
It's like
our tech
ours,
school too.
yeah,
We're
it's like
paying them
potentially,
So-
yeah, I
So,
agree that.
Hold on, I do have a question about this also, Peter.
Sure.
So on the quota
Yes.
piece of this, is that a maximum number of students that a sending district
Yeah.
would be allowed to send?
If we reach full enrollment, that is the case.
So,
We are not there currently, Bill. We
So-
are at
understand,
720, I think, which will decrease over the year because we do lose some every year. But it was like 720, I think it was 721 enrolled this fall. The quota, the actual full enrollment is, because there are quotas for each of the individual shops or operations, is somewhere in the 850, 880, so we're not bumping into it. We are bumping into it in certain places, and there is, in the Articles of Agreement, there also is, which I didn't highlight tonight because it's not part of the funding for it, but there are quotas for how many students can go into each of these programs.
understood.
And we have a real problem, a good problem in many ways, but a real problem in the animal technology area. For years and years, that has been oversubscribed. This year, the quota there is 40 students, 20 in each, in morning and afternoon. We had 61 who wanted to enroll.
And do we get a certain, and so we
And
have
we get a
specific
certain number of those
quota
seats, yes.
And we have more because we have more students in our district? Is our quota
Well,
higher?
in this, if you go to eligible enrollment, yes, but as it is now,
Hang
no.
with me here for a second. So if this were to go down this path, let's just take Quakertown, I'm not picking on it.
Okay.
It's just convenient for me.
Okay,
246 is their quota.
yes,
Right now, they have 330.
yes.
Are we gonna tell 90 kids they can't come?
Well, what you would do right now is Penridge would give them some of our slots.
You know,
But if, well, no, that's what actually happens currently, right?
but doesn't that also shift the percentage? So Quakertown,
Well, sure, as soon as you do that.
right,
And so if you're operating with the current formula, that makes a difference. But if you're operating with the eligible enrollment, it makes no difference because the numbers relate back to who's in the high school, not who's at the hotel.
You guys are saying quota, but is it maximum? And why are you using, the word quota is?
Because the quota is actually in the Articles of Agreement, Joan, is why I'm using the word quota.
Oh,
well,
to
because
me, it would
that's
mean
what's
that
up
that's
there.
what
It is up there, but I mean, the reason I use that because it's already exists
Yeah, it's,
for the individual programs
yes,
in the Articles of Agreement.
right.
And then the other, so these other schools, you said that there are some tech schools that use this, but
Yes,
are the schools more equitably sized?
that I can't tell you. I mean, there are 29, I believe, vocational, independent vocational schools across the state, ones that, not comprehensive ones, because areas like State College High School has a comprehensive, they run their vocational program in their high schools. But most of the districts obviously do what we do, which is group together and send students there part-time. Although Middle Bucks is not that, Middle Bucks is full-time, right? That's comprehensive, but although it's sent from various districts. But the funding formulas are all different. Not all different, but there's numbers of different versions, right? So this is a version, the one we use is a version, and there are other versions, right?
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering because our numbers are really far apart. I mean, that
Yes, and it is,
might work for
Well,
people who are similar
frankly-
in size, but.
Joan, the reason that State College area is running a comprehensive high school vocational program is exactly that. They were in Center County, there were 5 school districts. The 5 are extraordinarily disparate in size. State College area, I believe, is a 6A, and I'll talk in the academic, or athletic world, because that's the easiest differentiation, is a 6A school like Penridge is. But Bellefonte, the school that I went to for high school, was a 3A school. Penns Valley is, I believe, a 2A school. So Penns Valley has 1,700 students, State College area has 7,500 students. So it's this same deal, maybe not quite as disparate, but what State College did was they were providing the bulk of the funding, and eventually they said, we're not doing it, and they walked away. And it caused a real upheaval, as you can imagine, for the other 4 schools as well as for State College.
But were they providing the bulk of the students?
Nope,
Oh, okay.
Can you explain?
no, it was,
Well, okay.
The
is that, as you can imagine, State College area is loaded with professors, for lack of a
Ah.
better. So their students, there's a lot of pressure for their students to go to college. And
Understood.
I would guess 90-some% of them do, so most of them do not go
Okay.
to the vocational school, or did not go to
Can you
it. So that was
explain-
part of the problem too.
Can you explain to me with the animal tech program, since we're turning away lots of students, how do they decide what is the process for deciding which students they take and which students they don't take? Do they cap it for different school districts? Do we each
There
get
are
a certain
quotas
amount?
for different school districts, but first of all, you take the students who are already enrolled in the program.
Okay,
So there will be 10th graders, 11th graders, 12th graders who are enrolled in the program. Then you look at all the new students and their choices, and they make multiple choices, as I remember. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's
Mhm.
5, I can't remember what the number is.
3.
3, okay. So they make 3 choices, and if they could get into their first choice, and as I say, there is a quota, and in this case, they trade off. That is, if Quakertown doesn't have enough students going into that program, then Penridge gets more slots, or vice versa.
so what is the quota based on? Is it a third, and a third, or is it
No,
based
no,
on
it's on the
sizes of
ADMs.
the district?
It's on the ADMs, just like the funding is.
I couldn't get in to animal tech when I was in 9th grade, and they told me it was because it was first come, first served. So even though you might have a student who's academically here, if this person academically put their paperwork in first, that's who got in there.
But in theory.
That's
it's-
what I was told,
Yeah, no, I
and
know,
that might
but
not
in
be right.
theory, it's and I believe that's what they're trying to
But
operate
she
now.
is over enrolled this year. I think she has 21 in her
Yes,
AM
that's-
and
but that's-
22 in her PM.
That's the other thing. Sometimes
So she won't
teachers
take
will
more.
take as many as 23 on a 20
Mhm.
number quota if they're willing to do that. So then the 61, 46 of them get to participate. The others go into places like our landscaping program, in the same building, has some interaction, and sometimes they'll wait and transfer. Sometimes they'll say, I like this better, or I'm happy here. So yeah, that's a whole different issue.
So I think-
Enrollment.
So based on this new formula, if this was approved, essentially Penridge, because we'd have a bunch of extra slots, we would essentially take over the animal tech program, because if we
Well,
had
you
a
get
majority of
half
the
of
kids that wanted them, we'd get them all,
You get
and
half.
Quakertown, their kids wouldn't even be able to get in, they'd be dropping their enrollment.
You would get it half, absolutely, yeah. I mean, many of the students who apply to VOTEC and take the 3 different, not all get their first choice, obviously. I think this year, 12 of the programs are fully enrolled, some number, I forget the number, of the 19, 20 that we have. But we also have some that are under enrolled. A couple that we talked about earlier in the year that we're considering modifying or sunsetting and starting a different program because of chronic under-enrollment. And that's also part of the articles. The articles of agreement are quite comprehensive and quite complex if you really dig into it, right?
So
This is
who-
just one piece of it.
Who is in favor of this new formula, and who wants to propose it and get it approved? Who's,
Both Palisades, the 2 representatives, we sit as a committee of 3. Mr. Hollowell, who is the only person at the VOTEC who's served longer than I have, right? He's been there 25 years maybe more, long time, and on and off president of the Palisades board. And Mr. Klein, who is the current president of the Quakertown board. And we're sitting together to try to hammer out some agreement, right? They have both proposed this. I said, I don't think the Penridge board will even consider this, but the point of negotiating is you have to find out what the Penridge board will consider and what you would like me to go back with to them. I mean, I can say we want the current formula, and that will exist because it takes all 3 boards to agree to a change. So that's the issue.
I guess here's where this is the part that I don't understand, right? We essentially, when you say that, right? But it's essentially been changed without doing that in the past. It's been
Right.
changed twice without proper approval. So really, we should be approving the right-hand column that you showed, because that's what the
Nobody will
funding
do it.
formula actually says. Well, right, but.
Are you
so-
gonna vote
why
for
should we?
$338,000 increase next
I
year, or
mean,
whatever it was?
if that's what our bill is, but if you go back to that slide, one of the things that you can see is even though we are taking a substantial, we're dedicating a substantial amount of the fund balance each year to the budget, it's not decreasing much, so we're obviously we're getting in more revenues, or we're not spending as much as we're proposing we're going to spend. So what makes sense is to look at, instead of let's find where that middle is and what we're actually spending, and then increase above the Act 1 cap that we currently have, increase that cap to whatever number, what is it, 1%, I think is what we're underfunding it. So if you increased it by 1%, you wouldn't keep borrowing money from fund balance. On paper, it would look like you are, but then when you balance it all out at the end, you really aren't, because when you look at the numbers as they come in, you're not really spending the money that you're dedicating to from fund balance to the budget.
Well,
You
we
know what
are
I'm saying?
current, that's been the problem. For years, we did
Well,
not
right,
do
by like
that,
one-
despite the
But
fact.
we're at about 1%, aren't we? Isn't it about 1% that we're actually taking out of fund balance?
$200,000, so 1% of what?
I'm thinking 1% of the
Last year's numbers was
$3-4 million that we
roughly
have in the.
$200,000 decrease in the fund balance. The fund balance was 3.4 something, now it's down to 3 almost 3.
Right.
So that was the decrease. The budget, if you're talking about percentage of the total budget, the budget is $8.8 million more or less. So that's considerably more than 1%. I
I'm
don't know where
looking
your
at,
1% number comes from.
hold on. Okay, so you went, the fund balance was 3.4, almost 3.5 in 2017, and it's down to,
3.3 something
Well,
now.
a li-
So it's-
so let's say 3.4, right? So you're talking about,
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
and so that's what I'm talking about. You're only, if you look at that $100,000, that $100,000 number, and you raised that Act 1 cap, so that you weren't borrowing that $100,000, it would be a middle ground. You'd still be using the fair funding formula, but you wouldn't be paying $300,000 this year and Quakertown paying $800,000 this year. It would be $100,000 dispersed equitably through the current funding formula.
Let me
so we
finish
weren't
and then I'll
borrowing.
show you what some of the other proposals are.
Okay.
So this is using the ADM enrollment funding, the current funding formula for the 1920 year. This is what will presumably happen based on the enrollment over at the vocational school. And what you see here is this is changed from past years. Both Penridge and Palisades will see an increase in district payment next year, presumably. Quakertown will see a decrease, and it's because of how the enrollment numbers have changed and how that has affected this 5-year rolling average. The numbers are not great. Palisades would actually, and I misspoke, Palisades would be the one that would have assumed the 2.3%, the Act 1 increase, because they would see the biggest change, so to speak, even though it's smallest numbers and smallest school. Penridge would be in the middle, but both would be increasing, whereas Quakertown would be decreasing, which has not been the typical pattern. The typical pattern has been 1 is increased and 2 have decreased. In this case, it would be 2 increase and 1 decrease. But that's what this would look like projected to this coming year.
Is that with the 5-year average?
With the 5-year average, yes. This is the opposite. This is the eligible enrollment funding projections for this coming year. And you can see, this is what it does to, and this is why Penridge is not gonna agree to this, right? I'm using this just to show you what the situation is between the two, if you will, extremes, or between the two versions, whatever you want to call it. So, here's why I wanted to continue, because there are other things that have been proposed, either a hybrid model, some sort of combination of the ADM rolling average and the eligible enrollment. A phase-in of a change, whatever it is, over 5 years or 10 years, like we do some other things to minimize the impact of it. an increase, what you talked about, I believe, the increase to the cap above Act One, say 1% a year or 2% above the cap until we equilibrate at the reasonable numbers. And that would be obviously require an incremental increase, something above 2.3% next year if you were to implement it that soon. But these are other options that I think should be considered, that we haven't really talked about, and I haven't asked because it is, I think, something that I know business manager enjoys churning through all those numbers when they're all, as you said, hypothetical, right? But, so that's where we stand. As I say, I'm looking to go back with these folks and have further discussions about, if you want me to say absolutely no way at any time ever, of the eligible enrollment, I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that we know where we stand.
But to that point, that's what's on the table right now.
That's what's been proposed by the other two, the representatives from the other two senators. The joint operating committee has not discussed this
I
yet.
understand. But
Right,
that's
so it's just the three of us.
your other two counterparts.
Yes,
Yeah, no.
and we're trying to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
51%
geez, surprise,
increase.
surprise.
Yeah, no.
Can I just ask you, when you talked about that $300,000 increase for us and the $800,000 increase, I'm trying to find it on here, from
There.
Quakertown. So that was for this year,
This year, yes.
so that's already passed.
For the 18-year, yes.
So it's not the calculation.
Because those are the numbers that we know as factual, right? The
Right.
next years are projected, right, kind of thing.
So,
Because here's the other caveat that I should tell you, or condition. The ADM numbers aren't even the ones that are in the fall or October 1 like everybody else uses. Believe it or not, they're the spring numbers. So, again,
Okay.
that's what was done way back when, and it's tough to change all of these things. But so we won't know what the ADM number for this year is until the spring for each of the three sending districts.
so what you were looking at for this year is just a hypothetical at this point?
Oh yeah, this is what we think might happen. It's not what will happen, it's what we think will happen based on the numbers of the enrollment this fall. But the enrollment that counts is what those numbers are when spring comes around.
So Quakertown wouldn't be looking at an $800,000, based on this, because they're the lowest. So if we paid.
They would see a decrease, yes. They
No,
would
but
not be,
I mean, if you took away this, if you
Oh.
took away the cap,
if you, I know what you're asking now. If you use the without cap for this year, no, it wouldn't be $800,000. I don't know what it would be. It would be less, but it wouldn't be $800,000. That's correct.
and even though Palisades is paying the most, it's a 2.3% increase on what they were paying, right? So,
Yes, absolutely.
and they were paying the least, so
They were
2.3.
paying, this year they're paying $752,000 and change.
Right, so 2.3% increase for them is far different than a 2.3% increase for Quakertown. So when we cap it,
Absolutely.
so when we're capping it
In
with
terms
this
of-
artificial cap, when that largest cap falls on Palisades, then we're really underfunding it because you're capping it at their number, and the 2% of their number is not nearly what 2% of capping it at our number or
Well,
their
you
number
can
is.
see what happens in the overall number, that down at the bottom, where I put all three,
Right,
the payment goes from, this current year of $6,023,000 down to $6,004,000. I didn't put it on there, but I believe that number comes in at about 72% of the total budgeted revenue.
and the biggest reason for that is because right now we're capping it, right now Palisades falls into that highest category where the cap is.
The biggest reason is the Act One, the
Well,
fact
right,
that
but when-
nobody wants to exceed
But
the
your
Act One.
cap, right, but when it falls in Palisades' lap because they're the smallest contributor and you're capping it at their 2%, that's what's really hurting us this year, because when you were capping it at Quakertown's 2%, that's a lot higher, because 2% of Quakertown's number is a lot more than 2% of Palisades' number.
That's true, but every year, you'll see, look at the decrease here, across this slide, it's the third line down, third set of numbers down. The decrease has been every year, 6.482, 6.414, and so on, right? Those numbers decrease regardless of who's absorbing the increase,
But
right?
but it's gonna be a more drastic jump.
It may be a more drastic jump, but it drops every year because of the way this formula shakes out.
How receptive is, because Quakertown, it sounds like, has not been receptive to paying more than the Act One index for an increase for them. How receptive is Palisades to paying more than the Act One index? Because if they're the ones who are at the top this time, it's really about them committing to paying more than the 2.3%.
I certainly can't speak for Palisades, my guess is they're not, because they have run their budgets, not either at 0 or at number, this year I believe their increase was something on the order of 0.5%. So they try to stay under the Act One index, overall. And as Mr. Daubert will tell you, I mean, this is contributory. Now, I will also tell you that the Penridge contribution at one time was almost $3 million. Currently, it's $2.2 million, less, not including the debt service, which is, obviously part of what we pay, but it's a separate account kind of thing. So it has dropped dramatically because, we have benefited in the sense of how much we pay. It has not benefited the VOTEC, obviously. It's been a double-edged sword, in my opinion.
Well, from my perspective, when you asked what we want you to tell them when you go back,
That's what I'm.
I would tell them this funding formula is fair, let's work on the one that's not.
Okay. I'm sure
And
that's even out of the scope of what we're
and I'm
doing.
gonna go to the meeting, so I'll say it myself, I don't
And
mind,
you're
but.
welcome to say it, but I am telling you